What's going on, duelists? It's your boy Nick, bringing you today on the channel an update to my Dinomorphia deck profile for the post crossover breakers format. For those of you new to the channel, welcome. My name is Nick. We do Yu-Gi-Oh content mainly focused around rogue and casual decks alike. If that's the kind of Yu-Gi-Oh that you're interested in, then I highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel. We are currently working our way to 2,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. So with the intro out of the way, Dinomorphia has been a deck that I brought to the channel in the past, but I haven't profiled it or updated the deck list recently. It's been at least a year since I've even touched the deck, and honestly, I kind of had a little bit of an itch to want to dive back in to the world of Dinomorphia. Not only because A, the deck is extremely fun to play, maybe not play against, but if you're piloting it, it's a total blast, but it's a budget and very powerful control deck that I think has a pretty good footing as a rogue deck this upcoming format, especially post crossover breakers, which at time of recording, I believe drops early December. And that side set brings in the addition of Malice as well as Ryziel into our format, which are obviously decks that have seen major success in the OCG, and there's no reason to think otherwise that they won't see success here. So I wanted to bring you guys a update to my Dinomorphia list for this crossover breakers format, and I couldn't be more excited to bring you guys the updated list. So you know how we do here on the channel, always start with the monster lineup first. Now this is a 40 card deck list, extremely concise and compact, very consistent. But as you know, we're going to start off with the monster lineup first, and it's funny because there's only 2 main deck monsters in the theme. So we have a playset of 3 Dinomorphia Theresia, followed up by 2 copies of Dinomorphia Diplos, the only main deck monsters that this archetype actually has. And we're on a 3-2 ratio for the simple fact that we don't want to brick on too many normal summons, A, and B, Theresia is just the better normal summon when compared to Diplos. Diplos' effect allows you to Foolish Burial when he's normal or special summoned, a Dinomorphia card. However, that effect, while not terrible, Theresia is a lot more proactive and just the better effect overall. When she's normal or special summoned, she lets you set a Dinomorphia trap directly from your deck. So think of her like an archetypal Altergeist Marionetter, for example. And then both are level 4 Dark Dinosaurs, and each one has an effect when they're destroyed by battle or card effect. In either case, they can banish any trap from grave to special summon a level 4 or lower Dinomorphia monster from the graveyard except themselves. So like Theresia can float into Diplos, and Diplos can float into Theresia upon destruction, as long as you have a trap in your graveyard to banish. So obviously really cool effects there, and basically these are the monsters that are going to get you set up and have your game plan, you know, continue on onward. So that is actually the only monsters we play in this deck, believe it or not. We're on 5 main deck monsters, as crazy as that sounds. And that's actually for a specific reason, because moving into the spells, you'll see that we're on a playset of Time-Tearing Morganite, a very interesting spell. Just got a reprint in this year's Megatins. And this card states that for the rest of the duel, you apply the following effects. You cannot activate monster effects in the hand for the rest of the duel, but what'll happen is you'll draw 2 cards instead of 1 for your normal draw during your draw phase, and you'll conduct 2 normal summons / sets instead of just 1. Which basically means you get to draw 2 during your draw phase every turn, and you'll get a double summon every turn. And then if you can discard this card from your hand and banish a Time-Tearing Morganite that's in the graveyard, and then when you normal summon this turn, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects. Which is really strong, especially since, you know, you can normal summon cards like Theresia, and you don't want those cards to get stopped. You can force them through with cards like Morganite. And since this deck wants to play a slow grind game, the, you know, drawing 2 for your draw phase every turn definitely adds up and helps recoup some of your advantage and helps keep you in the game, because this deck wants to like slow things down to like a snail's pace basically and have the opponent play at your level basically. Then to round out the remaining 2 spells is 1 card of Demise, insane draw power for this deck, and then 1 Called by the Grave. And this rounds out the spell lineup. So we're literally on 5 monsters and 5 spells in this deck. And believe it or not, the rest of the main deck is literally 30 trap cards, which is I know that sounds nuts, but I'm telling you, this deck is insanely consistent and so much fun to play. So that wraps up our spell count in our Dinomorphia list. Now moving into the traps, which in my opinion are the stars of the show here. We have a playset of Dinomorphia Frenzy and a playset of Dinomorphia Domain. These are basically your archetypal fusion traps A little bit of a spoiler for those of you who don't know what Dinomorphia is or are just completely unfamiliar with the archetype. Dinomorphia, their boss monsters reside in their extra deck, and they are fusions. Now, both Frenzy and Domain allow you to use material from the deck and or extra deck, respectively, which means that these cards can lose to something like Ash Blossom, but we have tons of ways to like mitigate and play around that. But these just allow you to fusion summon into your Dinomorphia fusions. And the other thing that Dinomorphia does, for those of you unaware, is that Dinomorphia wants you to get your life points as low as possible. The lower your life points are, the better it is for you, because a lot of your cards have additional benefits the lower your life is. So one thing that I didn't bring up with Theresia and Diplos is if your life points are at 2,000 or less, when you activate the Theresia effect, she gains 500 attack permanently, so she's a 2,000 attack like normal summon. And then the Diplos, if you activate his effect while your life points are 2,000 or less, when he sends a Dinomorphia card from deck to grave, you inflict 500 damage to your opponent as well, which is pretty cool. But like I said, these are basically your main ways to get to your fusion setups, and each of the Dinomorphia normal traps also have graveyard effects that you can activate while your life is at 2,000 or less. The normal traps prevent you from taking effect damage for the turn, which is obviously pretty strong and a good way to keep you alive and keep your opponent from like stacking you with something silly, because you do actually tend to get your life extremely low. So 3 Frenzy, 3 Domain, definitely never want to play any less than those. Those cards are absolutely crucial for your strategy. Up next, we do have a playset of Dinomorphia Intact, as well as 1 copy of Dinomorphia Sonic for our counter trap lineup. Now, these 2 cards are, well, Intact specifically is really strong. This is what allows us to punish when our opponent tries to Ash Blossom our Domain or Frenzy. This just states that while we control a Dinomorphia card and the opponent activates a monster effect, we can pay half of our life, negate that effect, and destroy the card. And then for the rest of the turn, any battle damage we take just becomes half of our life at the time that we would take it. And then the counter traps, unlike the normal traps, they have graveyard effects where if our life points are 2,000 or less, during damage calc, if we were to take damage, we can banish the counter trap instead, and we take no damage from that specific battle. And then in Dinomorphia Sonic's case, it's just your spell trap negate. So whereas Dinomorphia Intact stops monsters, Sonic stops spells and traps, but at resolution you do have to destroy a Dinomorphia you control, which again isn't an issue because all of your Dinomorphias float for the most part. So 3 Intact, 1 Sonic is obviously a really good ratio. Then moving into the remaining Dinomorphia normal traps, we play 2 copies of Alert, followed by 1 copy of Brute. Alert is pretty much just an archetypal monster reborn for the theme. You special summon Dinomorphias from grave whose total levels equal 8 or less. So this allows you to summon out like either Diplos and Theresia, or you could summon out like one of your fusions, for example, which we'll talk more about when we get to the extra deck. But having an archetypal monster reborn is obviously really good in an archetype, especially when said archetype is only playing 5 main deck monsters. You do need a way to like recur your Theresias and Diploses back to field to either trigger their effects again or to make extra deck plays, which is pretty crucial. So, and then the 1 copy of Brute is just removal for the archetype. Again, all of these trap cards have a cost that you must pay half your life, which again feeds into the overall theme of the deck. And now, moving on to some of the more generic traps, we're on triple copies of Dominus Impulse, followed by triple copies of Infinite Impermanence. Impulse is just an insane hand trap this format. If your deck can play it, play it. I know the card is extremely expensive, and unfortunately, if budget is an issue, I wouldn't recommend playing this, obviously, because the card is a bit pricey at the time being. I would recommend playing something like a triple Upstart Goblin, which effectively means you're playing like a 37-card deck, in case you're not able to afford the impulses. But again, if money's not an issue, and as long as your deck can play under this card's restriction, I think Impulse is a fantastic hand trap, and then Impermanence is obviously just god tier when it comes to, hand traps in the format. Then we are on a small Soul of the Supreme King package, playing 2 copies of this. This allows us to special summon a Supreme King Zark from the extra deck, ignoring summoning conditions. Its effects are negated, and then it is returned to the extra deck during the end phase of the next turn. But not only does that help us pump out more damage on board, but if the opponent activates a spell card or spell effect while we control the Zark and the Soul of the Supreme King is in our grave, we can banish the Soul of the Supreme King from the grave and the Zark we control, to then special summon up to 1 Synchro Dragon, Exceed Dragon, Pendulum Dragon, and Fusion Dragon from our extra deck, which is really insane. Not only does this card have our life for cost on activation, which again feeds into what Dinomorphia already wants to do, but it puts a lot of pressure on the board for like no reason at all. And it can make your opponent have to play very awkwardly to kind of beat around the restriction. But there is a new addition to the extra deck that helps us enforce this restriction on our opponent, so they can't just buy time until the end of the next turn, and then once the Zark shuffles back, they can just activate spells again. We can actually keep them under that floodgate restriction, which I'll explain how when we get to the extra deck. But 2 copies of Soul the Supreme King, followed by 2 copies of Ferret Flames. Again, I wanted to keep the deck at an even 40 card count, so I was forced to, play 2 ofs of some of the cards that I would rather play 3 ofs. But again, in the name of consistency, I think keeping the deck at 40 is absolutely important for consistency, obviously. And again, Soul the Supreme King and Ferret Flames, while great cards, they're not entirely crucial to the deck's main gimmick. Again, you do not need these cards maxed out. I know a lot of lists sometimes do max them out, and I did have them maxed out in testing, but again, in order to keep the deck count down as close to 40 as possible, which again, I struck an even 40 card count, I had to limit these to 2 copies in the deck. And then again, just to be able to tutor into some of our traps, we do play 1 copy of Trap Tracks. I opt for a copy of this instead of a copy of Trap Trick, because I think Trap Tracks has a lot more synergy with this deck, allowing you to destroy a monster to set a trap, rather than having to reveal a trap with the same name. Since some of the traps we play, like the aforementioned Soul the Supreme King and Ferret Flames, happen to be 2 ofs, we're not maxing out on them. So like if we wanted to like set Ferret Flames off of Trap Trick, we'd have to reveal one, banish the other, and then that's the only Ferret Flames that we have for the remainder of the duel, basically. Whereas with Trap Tracks, we don't have to reveal an additional copy, we just destroy a monster we control to set any normal trap. And then since the Dinomorphias all float when destroyed, we proc a lot of value off of that. So I feel like Trap Tracks, in my opinion, is just a better card. As a 1-of in the deck, again, there's no need to max out on it either. And then rounding out the remaining traps in the deck, again, the deck's 40 cards, we play triple Solemn Judgment, followed by triple Iron Thunder. Just absolutely incredible counter traps, both of which pay half your life for cost, which again, totally feeds into what Dinomorphia already wants to do. And like I said, this wraps up our 40 card main deck count. So, like I said, it's 5 monsters, 5 spells, and 30 trap cards. Again, the deck is extremely fun to pilot, especially coming into, crossover breakers format. But now moving into the extra deck, we have a playset of Dinomorphia Rextrum, which is pretty much the archetype's boss monster. Really easy to summon. Again, you're pulling this card off of your either Frenzy or Domain. The Rextrum does require a Dinomorphia fusion as material, but that's not a problem because you're generally summoning Kentragina first, and we'll get to her shortly. But Rextrum has a Floodgate-like effect where, while he's on the field, monsters your opponent controls cannot activate their effects if their attack is equal to or less than your life points, which is obviously really insane. Or I'm sorry, equal to or greater than. My apologies. I think I got confused. So basically what this means is, like, if your life points are at 1,000 and you have a Rextrum on field, any monster that your opponent summons that has 1,000 or more attack cannot activate its effects. So this card is effectively like skill drain on legs. And again, because a lot of your cards pay half of your life for cost, you get your life points down to very low thresholds very quickly, which allows you to just maintain pressure with this card on the field, and it's just a house. Now, if that wasn't crazy enough, as a quick effect, he can pay half our life for cost to then make the attack of all monsters the opponent controls become what our life points are. So not only can he also pay half of our life for cost, but he can also just like make all of their attacks equal to whatever our life points are, which is usually going to be really low, which basically means that you can't ever really beat over Rextrum by battle because it's his effect can modify stats, so he can do this even in the damage step, which makes him very hard to interact with. And then if he's destroyed by battle or card effect, he does float into a level 6 or lower Dinomorphia from the grave. So overall, just an insane card. You definitely want to max out on a playset of it because it is pretty much the reason why this deck functions the way it does. Then, up next, the remaining 2 Dinomorphia specific fusions is 2 Kentragina and 2 Stealth Bergia. We just play 2 ofs of these because they're more like setup pieces. They're not really like your end board pieces like Rextrum is. But Kentragina is obviously the more useful of the 2, where her effect states that, as a quick effect, she can pay half your life for cost and banish a normal Dinomorphia trap from grave, and then her effect becomes that trap's effect at activation, which means she's basically like, I guess you could compare her to, oh man, I'm drawing a blank. Predaplant Verte, how like Verte could copy like polymerizations or fusion spells. Well, Kentragina is can copy any of your Dinomorphia normal trap effects, which makes Kentrigina really insane. It allows you to, you know, basically get double uses out of all your trap cards. And then she also loses attack equal to what your life points are, which I know sounds kind of weird, but basically the lower your life points are, the bigger her stats are, her baseline stat being 4k. And then she also floats upon destruction into a level 4 lower Dinomorphia. And then Stealth Bergia is more of a defensive card. Basically, as a quick effect, when your opponent activates a monster effect, you can burn them equal to that monster's attack. So it's a really cool way to like kind of close out games or cheese wins, excuse me. And he also floats just like Kentrigina does upon destruction. And while he's on the field, you do not have to pay life points for your trap cards or Dinomorphia effects if your life is 2,000 or less. So really crazy there. But that wraps up all of the Dinomorphia fusions. Now moving into the Supreme King Zark package, we do play one copy of Zark himself, and then we also have a new addition to the deck, one copy of Odd Eyes Archray Dragon. Now we play this because Odd Eyes Archray can special summon itself by tributing a Supreme King Zark you control, and Odd Eyes Archray Dragon's name becomes Supreme King Zark on field, which means that when you summon this over the Zark, you not only maintain the Supreme King Zark name on the board, but because it's no longer the Supreme King Zark you summoned off of the Soul of the Supreme King, this card will not shuffle back into the extra deck during the end of the next turn, which means you keep your opponent under that spell lock restriction, which is absolutely huge. So the addition of this card makes the Soul of the Supreme King package even more threatening, in my opinion. And then to round out that package, these are two of the monsters that we can summon off of it. We play one Brave Eyes Pendulum Dragon, which again is absolutely insane for the Yubel matchup, followed by one copy of Crystal Clearwing Synchro Dragon. A really strong spell trap negate for the deck. We also technically play Arc Rebellion Xyz Dragon that we can summon off of the Soul of the Supreme King card, but we're generally making this with the help of Raider's Knight, so we can OTK our opponent. So we're not really summoning this off of Soul of the Supreme King unless we're just trying to like push for lethal or something. Otherwise, it's usually just these two cards here. And then obviously, you know, I have Arc Rebellion and Raider's Knight. Again, Raider's Knight's really easy to make in this deck because all of your Dinomorphia main deck cards are level 4 darks. And then this is just a really cool OTK tool. Basically, Dark Ruling your opponent's board in a way, and then gaining the attack of the all monsters on the board combined. So this card is totally packs a punch. And then to round out the remaining two cards in the extra deck is one Lagia and one SP Little Knight. Obviously really strong generic toolbox options for the deck, and Little Knight offering the deck some removal and a way to mitigate in case we do get debarriered by chance. But realistically, debarrier is not that much of a problem for us. We can usually buy some time with the help of our cards like Solemn Judgment and Iron Thunder and whatnot. But that rounds out the extra deck. Now moving into the side, again, side deck's always up to personal preference, but I'm building the side for post crossover breakers format. So we do have a playset of Winged Dragon of Raw Sphere Mode, just an insane card in this deck, especially when you're going second and you have to break boards. This deck does not need their normal summon at all. Again, you're only playing 5 main deck monsters anyway. A lot of where your pressure comes from is your traps, so you can easily sack your normal summon for this and just like, you know, clear their board and then set 5 pass. Then we're also playing triple copies of Deck Lockdown. Really underrated card in my opinion. I think this card is going to see a lot of play moving forward. Very strong Floodgate-esque card. Then we're on 2 copies of Lightning Storm, followed by 3 copies of Evenly Matched in the side. Again, I know Evenly Matched isn't really the greatest card this format or the next, but when you pair Evenly Matched with something like Lightning Storm and or Sphere Mode, it just gets that much crazier in my honest opinion. And then again, this is a pretty cool counter for the Malice matchup, but we do have a playset of Soul Drains, another card that I think people are really sleeping on. And then to round out the last card on the side is 1 copy of Anti-Spell Fragrance. But this is going to round out my update to Dinomorphia post crossover breakers. If you guys enjoyed the profile, let me know down in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe if you're not already. Like I said, we're working our way to 2,000 subs. But this deck is a ton of fun. I absolutely cannot wait to bring it to locals and just see how it performs. I think this is a really cool budget option. There, you know, a lot of these cards did receive reprints, not only in last year's tins, but this year's tins. So I think the price of entry for this deck is a lot more affordable than it was before. And it's just a ton of fun. Like I said, believe it or not, having only 5 monsters and 5 spells and 30 traps in a main deck, it it cooks. I'm telling you, like, this deck is insanely powerful and just completely puts your opponents under like severe chokeholds, so to speak. Really fun to pilot, but very unfun to play against. But with that being said, this is Nick. Gonna be hitting that end phase. Like I said, make sure you like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more content coming your way, especially for post crossover breakers format. Again, I'm also still working behind the scenes to bring you duelists those live duels that I promised. So stay tuned for that. Just please be patient with me. And with that being said, this is Nick hitting that end phase. Peace.